Greetings and salutations. Thanks for clicking on the video. I sure do appreciate it. Today I want to talk about one of my favorite things about working with the Linux operating system, and that is the fact that it has the ability to bring new life to hardware that would ordinarily be put on the scrap heap if the only thing that was available to run it was the Windows operating system. This picture you're looking at is something I did a while back for a blog post, and it's basically all of my computers running the system monitor, and I took screenshots and collaged them together in GIMP so that you could see all of the different machines. So we start out with one CPU, and then two, and then three, and then four, and all of them run Linux, and all of them run quite well, and that's the whole point of that picture. So I wanted to explain that since I'm using it as the thumbnail for this particular video. Now, this is my latest project, what I have been working on here, and it is a machine that I've actually had in the house for a long time. It's my fiance's. She had it over at her mom's house. We went and got it, and when I first got the machine, it was running Windows 7 Ultimate, and it had 512 megabytes of memory in it. I couldn't believe the thing actually booted up, but it did. And so what I did with it was, the original thing was to keep the Windows installation going because she has some programs that she wanted to use that are Windows only, and she was just warming up to Linux at that time. So what I did to the machine was I just opened it up, cleaned all the dust out of it, made sure that everything was okay, and I happened to have some memory, so I bumped it up to 2 gigabytes of memory. Now, the motherboard itself can take up to 4 gigabytes of memory, but that's what I had on hand, so I just bumped it up to 2, and Windows 7 will run pretty good on 2 gigabytes. I mean, not the fastest thing in the world, but for what she wanted to do with it, fine, right? And this machine is probably about 10 years old at this point because the motherboard is one of those transitional motherboards that has SATA on it, and it also has IDE. So it's one of those dual controller boards that were available around 2005, 2006 when the hardware people were making the transition from the IDE controllers for drives and SATA, which is nice because that means that I've been able to kind of swap things in and out. The hard drive that came with the machine was an 80 gigabyte drive, believe it or not. And that was what Windows 7 was on. Well, it's still on because the Windows 7 drive is still in the machine. But what I did was I had a hard drive that I've had forever, which was a Western Digital Caviar, 160 gigabyte. And it's 10 years old, and it won't die. I've had it in and out of service for so long, it's not even funny. So I took that hard drive, and I put it in one machine and loaded Linux Mint on it. This has been about a year ago. And then I transplanted that drive into that machine and booted it up from that drive, changed the boot sequence. And that's how I got Linux into the machine, because a curious thing about it is that I cannot get the DVD or CD-ROM drive to work in the machine. And I didn't have a USB stick at the time that I was doing the install. I end up giving those away to clients all the time. I go get a bunch of them, and then I'll do somebody's machine, and I'll put some software on it, and I'll just hand it to them. So what I've started to do now is that if I work on somebody's machine, I actually say, okay, bring me a USB drive that I can put your stuff on. But anyhow, that's beside the point. I got the machine up and running. And the trick about working with the drives is that it's an old-style power supply. So I just happen to have this Caviar drive that has the old-style power supply plug on it, and it has a SATA port on it at the same time. So it's SATA with the dual power supply. So that's how I got the machine working. And anyway, long story short is that it actually works quite well. And I just upgraded it not too long ago to Linux Mint 17.2, which I thought, I'm not going to be able to do nothing with this old piece of junk machine. But as I have used it and tweaked it a little bit, it has become quite useful. And it sits in the dining area in the kitchen, And this is the go-to machine. Anybody needs to look something up, they go to this. I use it all the time to play music and do whatever I want to with it. The point of this ramble is that this is a machine at this point in time that would ordinarily be on the scrap heap somewhere. Yet I am running Linux Mint 17.2 with the very latest Cinnamon 2.6.13. I've got the latest kernel, the latest Ubuntu server kernel, which is 3.16.045. It does one Celeron processor, says it's clocked at 3.33 gigahertz, 2 gigs of memory, and the Intel Corporation integrated graphics controller that's on the card has 128 megabytes of video memory. So that is the entire machine, and it works. This machine, by the way, would run Windows 7, but there were no drivers available for Windows 7 for the video card. None at all, as a matter of fact. And I had to... that's one of the reasons I pushed to actually put it on Linux, is that Cindy was complaining. She was saying, well, the machine won't play video right, and it won't do this and it won't do that. And I kept telling her it's because you don't have any 3D acceleration. Everything's rendering in software. You got one processor, and that's making it so it doesn't work. So there's been a huge improvement switching it over to Linux Mint, simply because of the fact that you have a video driver that works, which is built into the Linux kernel, and I never had to look for it. Okay? So let's talk a little bit about this, because it is something that I like to do. I love turning what would be a junk machine into something that's running modern software. Now, yes, before we go any further and I get into anything else, on that machine, there are those of you watching this video who are probably saying, why aren't you running a lighter distro like Linux Lite or Lubuntu or something like that? And I like Linux Mint with the Cinnamon desktop. I'd rather lose a tiny bit of performance and have the interface that I like. And it's kind of fun to see it work on that machine anyway. It's surprising how well it does work, as a matter of fact. When I first put it in, it was very shaky, and now that I have played with it for a while, it's not. The only thing you'll notice, of course, is the load time because of the old hard drive. It's an old spinning hard drive, and so in other words, it takes a little while to boot. It takes a little while to log in and log out and open applications and things like that. But the only other thing beyond that you really notice is that sometimes if you play very HD type video and the machine's doing something in the background, it'll chop, it'll pause or whatever, but it's one processor. So that wouldn't change even if I was running Lubuntu. It wouldn't make any difference, because a lot of the modern browsers like Google Chrome, they're looking for a multi-thread processor. That doesn't have it, so there you go. That's what you're going to get. Anyway, let's talk about the minimum requirements for running Linux on your old junk machine. Let's say that you got somebody who gives you one, you find one in a closet somewhere, and you want to play with it. According to the Ubuntu website here, and we are on the community help wiki, very basic is 700 megahertz processor. An Intel Celeron processor is good. 512 megabytes of RAM, 5 gigabytes of hard drive space, 1024 by 768 screen resolution, and a CD or a DVD drive or a USB port or for the installer media. Now, if you have a machine that doesn't have a CD or DVD, or it doesn't work, and you cannot boot it off USB because some of the really older XP machines won't, then you can always take the hard drive out, or any hard drive that'll work, and install it on another machine and then put it in. The trick is, do not load any proprietary drivers. You can move installs of Linux from one machine to the other. Very easy. I do it all the time, as a matter of fact, by just replacing the hard drive and booting off the next machine. But there cannot be any proprietary drivers installed, because if there is, then the system will lock up when it boots and it won't work, because whatever you're driving with the proprietary driver is not going to be there. So that's how you do it. So install it. Don't install any drivers, and then move it, and it works fine. Now, I take exception with these particular specifications here, because I can tell you right now that if you run a modern Linux desktop like Cinnamon or GNOME or Unity with 512 megabytes of RAM, you're going to bang your head up against the wall. It'll drive you nuts. And I don't care how good your video card is either, because it just takes forever. So let's scan down here and get some more realistic numbers. We're talking about with the Unity desktop, and this also applies to Cinnamon, and it applies to GNOME. GNOME is actually Ubuntu GNOME is actually the biggest memory hog of them all. Cinnamon and Unity, they're about the same, although I have found that Cinnamon is a bit peppier than Unity. But it's when you go to GNOME, like a straight GNOME desktop, you better have some memory in the machine. So this is like what, a 1 gigahertz processor. They're talking about a Celeron here. They're talking about 1024 megabytes of RAM system memory. No, actually, they're talking about MB there. 3D acceleration capable video card with at least 256. Well, I'm getting away with 128, and pretty much every virtual machine in the world runs about 128 megabytes of video memory, and you can get relatively decent performance out of that. No, none of these machines are going to be gaming machines, kids. You're not going to be able to do that, but 90% of the people who use computers, like if you're putting the computer together for somebody else, what are they doing with them? They're surfing the web, they're watching an occasional YouTube video, listening to music, stuff like that. You don't need the fastest video performance to do that. You will need really fast video performance if you expect HD quality video, or if you're playing games or whatever, But people who go out and buy brand new computers today, 90% of the time, they only use 10% of the hardware capability. It's like the rest of it's just wasted. It's like people that go out and buy computers that have 16 gigabytes of RAM in them. Now, it's cool that you can get a computer with 16 gigabytes or 32 gigabytes or whatever the upper limit is on some of these machines these days. But when you really stop and think about it, or at least in my experience, I've never done anything that's ever... the most memory that I have in any one of my machines is 8 gigs. And I keep an eye on how much it uses. I put 8 gigs in the machine simply because of the fact that I was running a bunch of virtual machines at the time. I actually needed that to make all those virtual machines run at the same time. I was playing around with server farms and stuff like that. So that's why I got the 8 gigs. And when I got the 8 gigs, that was hot stuff, man. That was like a few years ago now. So I just don't really I really have to scratch my head and wonder why anybody needs anything over 816 gigs. But if you're a gamer or something like that, if you are doing a lot of video editing, something that slurps up a lot of memory, maybe you need that. Awesome, whatever. But for the average person, 4 gigs is a nice place to be with Ubuntu and any kind of Ubuntu distro. You can get away with 2 gigs. I'm running it on 2 gigs right now. Just make sure that you have a swap space enabled. And if you can actually make it work on 1 gig, but the trick with that is that when you partition your drives, you need to make sure that you have a huge swap space. In other words, if the machine has 512 to 1 gigabyte of memory, and now we're not talking about running a Unity desktop here, guys. We're talking about running something like Linux Lite or whatever. But what I do is I always make a huge swap area on the drive. And when I say huge, I mean like 2.5 gigabytes. And that way the system has plenty of room to work. If your computer has 1 gigabyte of physical memory, then I'd give it 2.5 gigabytes of swap to work with, or 2 or 3, so it has plenty of room. In other words, if you got 2 gigabytes of swap, give it an extra gigabyte or physical memory, give it some more swap space, like 3 gigs or something like that. No, I don't think you need to double it. Some people would say, well, if I have 2 gigs, then I should give it 4. If you want to do that, that's fine, but we're just talking about making sure the machine runs. If you get above 4, at about 4 gigabytes, then the swap space needs to be a little bit bigger than 4, like give it 5, and then above that, it's optional. In other words, if you have 8 gigabytes of RAM in your computer, you don't really need to give it 8 gigabytes of swap space. You could give it 2 and it'll work fine. The only difference is that it's not going to hibernate. Anyway, I'm getting off into a bunch of crap. let's go back to talking about this. So realistically, we want as much memory in the machine as we can get. So if you get one of these old machines, the first thing you need to do is figure out where you can get you can max out the memory in the machine. Processor speed is not going to affect your performance as much as the 3D acceleration, video memory, and memory in the machine. You can have a 1 gig processor, and you can have 256 megabytes here, or like a nice video card in it, and it will perform as good as a 3 gig processor with a crappy video card with not enough acceleration, because so much of what you see on your screen has to be processed by the GPU that you need to take as much of that off of the main processor as possible. Hope that made sense, but I know what it means. All right, so this is the basic requirements here, and I had a couple of other things up here to talk about. First of all, where do you get these machines? People give them away. Businesses are downgrading, trying to get away from Windows XP, or upgrading rather. They're trying to get away. Maybe they're going to Windows 7, even though Windows 7 is now going into long-term support mode. So these machines come up all the time, or you can just go on eBay. eBay is an awesome place to look because people are selling them. And like, here's this groovy little Dell here. I'd like to see what's in that thing, actually, to tell you the truth. Some of these are really cool little machines to play with. Here's an old Dell. I remember I had one of those in my office when I was working for a company about 5-10 years ago. So there's plenty of computers to choose from. What you're looking for in hardware is you're going to have better luck with Intel, because the Linux developers work very closely with the Intel Corporation, and the Linux kernels pretty much support all the Intel hardware, and you're probably going to not run into too many major issues. But this machine that I'm recording this video on is all AMD. And when I first got the machine, now this machine now is 5 or 6 years old, gang. So this one could be argued, it could go on the scrap heap too, but it works fine. When I first got this machine, I was having all kinds of problems with Linux drivers. And so I ran it on Windows 7 for a long time. Didn't do too great with the Windows 7 drivers. But now, when I switched it over to Linux full-time, I have noticed that the open source drivers for the old video card and everything actually work better than the drivers that I had when I was running Windows and had the proprietary drivers. In many ways, they work better. So it's kind of the luck of the draw. They tell you to go for Intel, but try it on your AMD hardware and see what it does. It might work. Now, you're probably not going to get a proprietary driver for that from AMD, because they don't support their older cards, but the open source drivers actually are not bad. So look for Intel hardware. Don't worry about whatever memory they have installed in the machine. Most machines that are 10 years old could handle at least 2 gigs of memory. So you can get an old machine even if it has 512 megabytes in it, which for Windows XP 10 years ago was not a bad deal. You could actually make it work pretty well. But anyway, you can usually expand these out to at least 2 gigabytes, 1 or 2, and that should be enough to make your Linux work. So I had something else up here, and we're talking about parts now, because you're going to need, you might need to be finding some things like hard drives and DVD drives and IDE stuff and things like that. I've actually found that Amazon is a great place to look, and you can find some pretty cool prices here. And I've bought a bunch of parts off of Amazon over the last couple of years. I've pretty much been able to find anything I wanted to. And now, when you're buying new old stock parts, which is basically what an IDE hard drive is going to be, you're always taking a risk. But I bought one not too long ago, and it worked out pretty good. So don't spend a great deal of money. I mean, my advice would be, don't get the hottest video card that was available for a machine that's 5-10 years old, because you don't know what you're going to get. If you have to upgrade the video, or you want to, look for something that's not going to break the bank. If it shows up and it doesn't work for some reason, then you haven't lost much. And that's kind of the way to look at it. I mean, if you got the machine for free in the first place, it's kind of like catch as catch can. I've worked on computers for a long time, so I've actually got or had, I don't anymore, but I had boxes and boxes full of parts. So a lot of the times if I need something, I'll go scrounge something up. I'm out of parts though, so I have to actually go buy them now because I don't do as many machines as I used to. But there's all kinds of stuff that you can find on Amazon, and this is actually a really fun hobby. And then you could do these machines and not put a whole lot of money into them. If you get them up and running nice, here's something you can give to grandma so she has a computer. Here's something that you can give to a kid that just wants to play. Put Linux on them and turn them loose. It's great. Kids, by the way, with Linux are awesome because they don't have the prejudices that people have who have been using computers for a while. It's very hard to get somebody who's used Mac or Windows for a long time to switch over because they just have so many prejudices going in. But if you take a kid, and not saying that they don't know Windows, I mean they just haven't been using it for years, it hasn't become muscle memory to make the computer work, they just take to it. They just sit down and go, oh, this is the way it works. Okay, that's the way my kids are anyway. So it's just a lot of fun, and it's one of the things I love about it. You can take an old machine and you can run modern hardware on it that is, modern software on it that's totally up to date, ready to go right now. You don't have to worry about security issues. And as near as I can tell, this is something that's going to continue to be a part of Linux for a long time. So Ubuntu 14.04 and Linux Mint, they are supported until 2019 before you have to move to another distro, right? Or you're going to have to, in other words, if you have a machine that's working on 14.04 right now, you don't even have to think about reinstalling it until 2019. But if you wanted to, when the next LTS comes out, the 16.04 version, I think that you could probably install that in its place and it will work just fine. I've played with 15.10 and I kind of know the direction that they're going. This should be something that continues to happen. So imagine having an operating system that will allow you to run 15-year-old hardware but be the latest and greatest at the same time. But of course, I have to say this before we close out this video, because if I don't say it, somebody's going to point it out in the comments, and I don't want to hear it. Of course, if you want the absolute best performance out of your computer, and that's a big deal to you, go to system76.com and buy one of their new machines with an i7 processor in it. 4 cores with 4 cores with 2 threads apiece and 8 threads and all that other stuff. Because this is what's going to give you the best performance, and they're designed to run on Ubuntu. However, the kind of machine that I would like to have from System 76 is going to cost me $1,500 to $2,000, depending on whatever it is. I don't have that kind of cash to spend on a computer. Not many people do. And what I have found is that doing the junk computers, I've built a computer network in my house, and I've probably paid over the last year for parts, computers, and everything about $300 to do the whole thing. Because I did buy a laptop, which is $150. I bought some parts for that. I bought some parts for the other junk machine. I'm always, picking up little pieces, bits and pieces. So I have this computer network in my house that I've probably paid $250, $300 to maintain and keep running, and actually add 2 machines to in the last year. Replace 2 machines, rather. So anyway, thank you for watching the video. I know I rambled on a bit, but I figured you guys might get a charge out of hearing it. It's something that really, it's my favorite aspect of working with Linux, is the fact that it works on all this different hardware. So thanks for watching. Talk to you again soon.